does this nice, this nice routine. Yeah, I want to be the grown-up in the room. But he didn't start out that way. Do you remember the first two debates? He came at me, and I said, wait a minute, what's this? And he came at me viciously.
While plenty of pundits and alleged political experts are focusing heavily on what happens in the Florida primary tomorrow, take a moment to consider what's about to happen in Ohio and why it's so important. And this has nothing to do with whether or not LeBron James lifts his leg again on basketball fans in Cleveland, though I'll wager there are a lot more people up on that controversy than the POTUS chase. Since 1944, Ohioans have sided with a losing candidate only once. Go back to the time they said Richard Nixon was the choice, and he was belted by eventual leader and winner John Kennedy in 1960. And seeing as at the moment there are some pollsters saying the Republican race is simply too close to call between John Kasich and Donald Trump, along with one candidate urging his followers to vote for somebody else, we got the preview of an excellent Donnybrook brewing here. Let's stir the pot of fact, if you will. Our guest is assistant professor at Ohio State University dealing in state politics and federalism. Welcome, Vladimir Kogan, to the Hard Line. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. So let me get right to it here. Marco Rubio telling his followers, if you want to beat Donald Trump, go vote for John Kasich. Was that a smart thing to do, and do you think it really has a chance of working?
That's a good question. I think it was certainly a strategic move. I think Rubio has seen pretty clearly that he really has no chance of winning Ohio. And I think at this point, any votes that go to Rubio are votes that really help Trump, right? So I think his goal is to do anything he can to prevent Trump from winning the state. And we'll see how effective that is. We'll see how many Rubio voters actually do follow that advice.
Is it not, though, fraught with all kinds of danger here? Because you're basically talking to your people, and then you confuse one side, another side, and then you've got the anti-Trump and the pro-Trump people working. I mean, this is a political mess that we've never seen before in our lifetimes here. So you have to think about strategy here in defeating Donald Trump. That seems to be what they're all focusing on here. But do Ohio voters want to hear that?
Well, that's a good question. I think it depends on which voters you ask, right? Certainly, I think the Ohio voters that are voting for Trump are probably not going to take that too favorably. But the voters who do prefer another candidate, any candidate other than Trump, I think they'll have some incentive to listen to figure out what's the optimal strategy for me if what I want to do is keep Trump from getting the nomination.
What is it you take from the reports coming out of various cities and counties? For instance, Franklin County, 39,000 requests for absentee ballots. 17,000 came from voters who are changing their party registration. What do you take from that?
Well, Ohio, I think, is an unusual state, and I think it's important to keep this in mind. We actually don't have partisan registration. So the registration that shows up in the official records is really depending on which primary you voted on in the last election. So the fact that we see so many people changing their registration suggests that there's a lot of voters who are voting in this primary who simply haven't voted in a primary before. So there's a lot of new voters being mobilized. I think that's the message that I would take away from this data.
Do you think, and again, this is just something, let's go ahead and talk political science here for a moment and strategy, that this might be dirty tricks? Because I'm hearing some people go, wait a minute, you got Democrats who'll vote for Trump because they want him nominated because they know come the general election, at least they feel that he would be an easy one to beat, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. It's fascinating.
I mean, there's probably some folks like that, and we call that kind of strategy party rating. So when one voter from one party tries to enter the primary of another party to help nominate the weakest candidate. But it's probably not a lot of too many people like that. I think I looked at the data recently, and really most of the people who are asking for absentee ballots are people that simply don't have a partisan registration, that haven't voted in a primary. So I think what's happening is that for the first time really in recent history, the Ohio primary is competitive and the national primary itself is competitive. So what happens in Ohio really will matter more so than most other years. So there's just, I think, a lot more people that haven't voted in these kinds of elections before who are going out and getting engaged and asking for ballots.
I got about 60 seconds left. Ohio, another one of those big labor states. Let's look on the left side here with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders here. This is fascinating again because Bernie has been beating people up. He's been doing the impossible at this point. Do Ohio voters go for a guy like Bernie Sanders and his type of message?
I guess we'll see. The polling shows him down pretty significantly. But that was also the case in Michigan, where he came back and won a short victory. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how close that race is. But what's interesting is that the Democratic primary is probably less important in Ohio because, unlike the Republican primary, it's not a winner-take-all election. So who wins and who gets second place is probably going to be less important for the Democrats than it is for the Republicans.
About 15 seconds. Do you personally, in your research, expect the polls to hold?
I guess we'll see. You know, the polls have been going back and forth, especially on the Republican side. So it's hard to know. I think it's going to come down to turnout and which candidate does a better job of really turning out their base.
And is that great? Gotta love Ohio politics because you just don't know what's happening. And you go ahead and ask for a Republican ballot. If you're a Democrat, it's great stuff. Great theater, if you will. Professor Vladimir Kogan, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your comments. You're going to hear a lot more comments when it comes down to what happens Tuesday night on a big night between Ohio and Florida. Make sure you join us right here on Newsmax. Our America Votes 2016 coverage begins Tuesday night with the Hardline right here. 6 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll set everything up. The polls then begin to close. We'll take you through the evening and bring you all the results right here on Newsmax and Newsmax.com. Now, there's that other key state where palm trees grow, rents are not low, and you secretly want to avoid the early bird special. Trust me on that one, okay? We'll look what happens in Florida next on the Hardline.